There is a type of love that doesn't end when the person leaves. It just changes form, like water that evaporates but continues to exist in another state, invisible but real. And perhaps it's exactly this impossible permanence that hurts the most, because you can't bury what hasn't died. You can't forget what's still alive inside you in places you didn't even know existed. Simone Weil, a French philosopher who lived only 34 years but felt the nature of love and loss more deeply than most do in a lifetime, discovered something radical about this wound that won't close, about this silence that screams louder than any words ever could. And what she discovered goes against everything we've been taught about overcoming, moving on, letting go. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, and for a split second, you forgot that that person is no longer here, and then reality falls on you like a stone, heavy and cold, and you have to learn everything again. Learn that they are gone. Learn to breathe in this world where they no longer exist the way they did. Have you ever felt your phone vibrate, and for an impossible moment, you thought it could be her, even though you know it's impossible, even though you're absolutely sure, but your heart doesn't understand logic and keeps waiting for what your mind already knows will never come? Have you ever noticed how you avoid certain places, certain songs, certain times of the day, because you know that there, at that specific moment, her absence will hurt in a way that you're not sure you can bear? Simone Weil didn't just feel it all, she dove into that pain with a courage that defies comprehension, and on the other side of this brutal journey found something most of us are afraid to even seek, a truth about the nature of love that can only be seen when you completely stop running from the hurt. And if you feel like these words are touching something inside you that has been dormant or perhaps never had the courage to look directly, something that hurts, but at the same time brings a strange relief of finally being named, then sign up. On this channel now, because we're going to explore together territories that most avoid, truths that Simone Weil paid with her own life to discover, and you won't want to miss what comes next, because what she taught about loving what's gone, about carrying absence as presence, about transforming a wound into something sacred without ever denying that it hurts, will completely change the way you see this person who left and the empty space they left. The pain you feel is not a sign of weakness. It is not evidence that you are not healing fast enough. It is not something that needs to be fixed or overcome within a timetable, acceptable to a society that cannot bear to see anyone suffer for long. That pain is proof that you truly loved, that there was something between you and that person that was real enough to leave a permanent mark on your soul. And Simone Weil would say that that mark, that open wound, is actually a kind of grace disguised as tragedy, because only those who love deeply can suffer deeply, and only those who suffer deeply can understand certain truths about the nature of love that people who have never allowed themselves to be completely vulnerable will never know. You carry that person inside you now in a way that you didn't when they were physically present, because when someone is here, at your fingertips, you can afford not to pay full attention. You can put off until tomorrow what you could say today. You can postpone hugs and conversations and moments of total presence. But when they are gone, when the possibility of a next meeting disappears forever or becomes so distant that it hurts to think about it, suddenly every memory becomes sacred. Every word exchanged takes on weight that it didn't have before. Every little gesture you didn't even notice it at the time. Now it shines in your mind like a rare jewel that you didn't know you were holding until it fell from your hands. And perhaps this is what Simone Weil has tried to teach us through her entire life, dedicated to understanding the nature of love and loss. That to truly love someone is to be willing to carry their absence with the same devotion as you would their presence. To allow the wound to remain open, not because you enjoy suffering, but because closing the wound would be erasing the last physical connection you have with something that was too real and true and important to simply forget. The truth is that no one really forgets their departed love. They just learn to lie better about it, to smile when they ask if everything is okay, to change the subject when that person's name comes up in conversations, to pretend that they have already overcome it, when in fact they only learn to function around the hole they left, like a city that rebuilds around a bomb crater, because it is easier to adapt to the damage of than confront him directly. But you don't want to learn to lie better. You want to understand what to do with this truth that you carry, with this love that no longer has an object, with this need to talk to someone who can no longer listen. And it is exactly here that Simone Weil has something radical to offer you. Not a solution, not a cure, but a completely different way of seeing what is happening to you. Weil spent her life studying the nature of suffering, not abstractly or academically, but viscerally, through her own flesh, her own headaches that had plagued her since adolescence, her own fragile body that she pushed beyond any reasonable limit, because she believed that only through suffering shared with those who suffer could she truly understand something true about the human condition. She worked in factories when she could have been in universities, went to war when she could be safe, refused food when food was available because French people under Nazi occupation didn't have enough food, and she wouldn't allow herself to have more than they had. And this stubborn refusal to separate herself from the suffering of others eventually killed her. Tuberculosis aggravated by self-imposed malnutrition, 34 years of intense and painful life that she lived as if she were perpetually on fire. And in the midst of all this suffering, in the midst of all this physical and mental and spiritual pain, Weil had profound mystical experiences, moments of connection with something she called God, but that you can call whatever makes the most sense to you. Moments where the pain transformed into something different, didn't disappear but changed in quality, as if the wound opened so wide that light could enter. One such experience took place in Solesmes, a Benedictine abbey, in the year 1938, during the days of the Passion of Christ, while she was suffering one of her worst attacks of headache, pain so intense that she could barely stand. And it was in exactly this state, in this impossible combination of physical agony and presence in the Gregorian chants that filled the chapel, that something happened, something she described as Christ descending and taking possession of her, not metaphorically but really, a presence who entered the space created by accepted pain, not by pain denied or escaped, but by pain completely recognized and consented to. And it is this idea of consent that becomes central to everything Weil taught about love and loss, because for her, truly loving is consenting to the existence of the other exactly as he is, including his absence, including his departure, including the pain that this departure causes. And this consent is not passive resignation. It is not simply accepting because there is no choice. It is something much more active and much more radical. It is choosing to look directly at reality without trying to change it through fantasies or denials or comforting stories that soften the sharp edges of the truth. You're used to thinking that love means wanting to be close, wanting to possess in some way, wanting the other to continue to exist in your life in the way you need. But Weil is saying something completely different. She's saying that true love is the opposite of possession. It's looking at someone and loving them without needing them to be different than they are, without needing them to stay, without needing them to fill the void inside you. And when you can do that, when you can love without needing reciprocity or presence or continuity, then you are loving in a way that she calls impersonal, not cold or distant, but free from ego, free from the need to use others to fill her own existential gaps. And now you're beginning to see that the pain you feel for the person who left isn't just about losing someone you loved. It's about confronting the fact that maybe you never loved in that impersonal way that Weil describes. Maybe your love always had elements of need mixed with elements of generosity. Maybe you loved not just because that person was who they were, but also because they fulfilled something in you, because being with them made you feel complete in a way that you didn't feel alone, because their presence temporarily solved the problem of your own existential loneliness. And now that it is gone, you are not only dealing with its absence, but also with the return of that emptiness you had before it appeared, that emptiness that you thought had been healed, but had actually only been temporarily covered. Simone Weil has a concept for this. She calls it gravity, this force that constantly pulls you down, back to ego, back to need, back to the illusion that you can fill the inner void through external things, be it through people, achievements, experiences, anything that would temporarily don't make you forget that deep down there is a hole that nothing created can permanently fill. And most people spend their entire lives under the control of gravity, desperately searching for the next person, the next job, the next achievement that will finally make them feel complete. But Weil realized that this search is infinite because emptiness is an essential part of the human condition. It is not a defect to be fixed, but a fundamental characteristic of what it means to be human. to be a creature that knows that it is incomplete, that misses something that it cannot even name, that carries within itself a desire for something that no finite object can completely satisfy. And then the person you loved comes and for a while seems to fill that void, seems to be the answer you've been searching for, and you allow yourself to believe that you've finally found what you've been missing, that the search is finally over, but then they leave, by death or by choice or by circumstance, and the void not only returns but seems bigger than it was before, more painful than it was before, because now you know exactly the size and shape of what's missing. You have a precise template of the absence, and it hurts in a way that generic pain never could hurt. But Weil would say that this moment of maximum pain, this moment where you feel the emptiness with brutal clarity, is actually a moment of potential grace. Because now you have the opportunity to stop trying to fill the emptiness and start looking at it directly, recognizing that it exists, accepting that it is part of you, and maybe, just maybe, discover that the emptiness is not an enemy, but a portal, not a problem, but a possibility, not what separates you from the divine, but what connects you to it. Because for Weil, God is not in the things that fill you, but in the empty space that allows you to receive something greater than anything created could offer. And as long as you are desperately trying to fill the void with people and experiences and distractions, you will never create enough space for something truly transformative to enter. And this is where everything you thought about love and loss starts to fall apart, because you always imagined that the goal was to overcome the pain, to fill the space left by the person who passed away, to find someone new or something new that could replace what was lost. But Weil is suggesting something radically different. She is suggesting that perhaps the goal is not to fill the void, but to inhabit it, not to replace what was lost, but to transform your relationship with the loss, not to stop loving the person who has passed, but to learn to love them in a different, so that it doesn't depend on her physical presence, so that it can exist entirely in absence, in memory, in the silence where she used to be. It sounds impossible, I know. It sounds like asking someone to breathe water or see in the dark. But Weil insists that not only is it possible, but it is the only kind of love that truly deserves the name, because everything else is just need disguised as love. Ego-seeking fulfillment disguised as generosity, fear of loneliness disguised as connection. And you may feel something inside you resisting that idea, because if it's true, if real love is love that doesn't need presence, then what you felt before wasn't real love, or at least it wasn't just love. It was a confusing mix of love and need. And recognizing that hurts almost as much as recognizing that the person is gone, because it means that maybe you never experienced what love really is. Maybe you confused emotional dependence with genuine connection. Maybe you loved not the person, but what the person made you feel about yourself. But here's what Weil also understood, and what can start to change everything for you. The fact that your previous love wasn't perfectly pure doesn't mean it wasn't real. It doesn't mean it had no value. It doesn't mean that you need to retrospectively devalue everything that was experienced. It just means that human love always contains this mixture. It always has elements of need along with elements of generosity. And the process of purifying love, the process of transforming love from necessity into impersonal love, that process only happens through loss, through separation, through the painful experience of continuing to love when there is nothing more to gain from it, when there is no longer presence to enjoy, when there is no longer reciprocity to hope for. The person who has passed away has given you a brutal gift, the gift of having to learn to love without reward, to love without a present object, to love purely because love is what remains when all other reasons for loving have disappeared. And if you can do that, if you can continue to love that person in their absence, not through denial of the absence, but through complete acceptance of it, then you will have learned something about love that most people do. You never learn, something that can only be learned through this specific pain you are feeling right now. Simone Weil had a friend, a priest called Perrin, with whom she shared her deepest reflections through letters. And in one of those letters, she wrote something that may illuminate what you are going through right now. She said that absolute attention is prayer, and that the purest form of attention is attention to what is absent, because when something is present, your attention is always mixed with a desire to possess it, to change it, to use it for your own purposes. But when something is absent, when you can no longer touch it or change it or use it, then your attention can finally be pure. It can finally be real love. So when you think about the person who is gone, when you feel their absence, when you find yourself wanting to talk to them knowing you can't, you are not just grieving. You are practicing the highest form of love. You are learning to love impersonally, to love without expectation of return, to love simply because love is what you are when all the layers of ego are removed. But that doesn't make the pain any less. It doesn't make the wound hurt any less. And while never promised she would, she just said that pain can be transformed into something sacred if you stop fighting it. If you consent to it in the same way you consent to the existence of the person you love, completely, without reservation, without trying to negotiate a softer version of reality. And maybe that's what you need to hear right now. Not that everything will be okay, not that the pain will go away, not that you will get over it and move on, but that the pain you feel is worth feeling, is important to be honored, is an essential part of the process of transforming egoic love into true love, and that at the bottom of that pain, if you go down deep enough, if you stop fighting and start consenting, there is something waiting for you, not relief necessarily, but truth, not happiness, but meaning, not fulfillment, but a different way of completeness that comes not from having everything you need, but from finally stopping needing anything beyond what you already are. The person who is gone is no longer here. That is inescapably true. But the love you feel for them is still there, and perhaps always will be. And Weil would say that this love that persists in absence is more real than any love that depends on presence. Because now you love, not because it is easy or convenient or fulfilling, but simply because love is what remains when everything else is removed. And this residual love, this love that survives the very death of what is loved, this is the love that comes closest to what Weil called divine love, love that exists for its own sake, not as a means to another end, not as a solution to loneliness or a way to feel complete, but as a state of being that needs no justification or reason or object, love that simply is because it cannot not be. And now we need to go even deeper, because so far we've talked about love and loss in general, but you didn't lose general love. You lost a specific person, with a specific face and a specific voice and a specific way of saying their name. And that specificity matters. It matters more than any philosophy can capture, because it's not about abstract concepts. It's about the concrete absence of someone irreplaceable. Simone Weil understood this deeply. She was not interested in philosophical abstractions disconnected from lived experience. Everything she wrote came from real pain, from real body, from specific moments of suffering that marked her flesh and her soul in ways that never fully healed. She knew the difference between talking about affliction and being inside it, between describing pain from the outside and feeling pain consume you from within. And she had a specific word for this type of suffering that not only hurts but destroys the soul. She called it malheur, which can be translated as affliction, but loses something in the translation, because malheur is more than suffering. It is suffering that catches you on 3 levels simultaneously: body hurting, mind breaking, and social position being degraded. It is the kind of pain that makes you question whether you are still human, whether you deserve to be treated as a person, if you still have value in a world that seems to have decided that you don't matter. And you know this pain, don't you? Because when the person you loved left, it wasn't just your heart that hurt. It was your entire sense of self that began to crumble. It was your ability to function in the world that was compromised. It was the way you see yourself and how you imagine others see you that fundamentally changed. Suddenly you became a person who was left, a person who wasn't chosen, a person who wasn't enough to make someone stay. And this narrative that forms in your mind, this story about what the loss says about you, hurts as much as the loss itself, maybe even more, because the loss happened, it's fatal, the consummate, but the story you tell about what the loss means, that story keeps repeating itself, keeps hurting you again and again. Every time you remember, every time you see something that makes you think of her, every time you find yourself automatically reaching for your phone to share something before remembering that she's no longer there to receive your messages. Well would say that this additional layer of suffering, this layer of meaning that you add to the raw pain of loss, is where ego comes in, because ego needs to turn everything into a story about you. needs to make every event say something about your worth, your identity, your place in the universe, and when something painful happens, ego immediately goes to work constructing narrative that explains why it happened and what it means about who you are. And often that narrative is terribly cruel, much crueler than objective truth ever would be. So you're not just dealing with the fact that the person is gone, you're dealing with all the stories that ego has built around this leaving. Stories about inadequacy, about not being interesting enough or beautiful or valuable enough, about there being something fundamentally wrong with you that makes people eventually leave. And those stories are worse than reality, because the reality is that people leave for 1,000 different reasons, most of which have nothing to do with your worth as a person. But ego doesn't accept that. Ego needs to make it all about you, needs to find fault with you. That explains why this happened, because it's less scary to live in a world where you have control through your own defects than in a world where bad things just happen without reason or justice or meaning. And here's where Weil's thinking gets radical, in a way that can actually change something in you if you let it in. She says the solution isn't building better storytelling. It's not replacing cruel story with kind story. It's not convincing yourself that you're valuable and worthy of love and haven't done anything wrong, because all of these stories, even the kind ones, are still ego constructs. They're still ways of making it all about you. They're still ways of avoiding the deeper truth, which is that the universe doesn't revolve around your self-worth. Things don't happen because you deserve it, or don't deserve it. Love doesn't come or go based on how hard you try to be a person worthy of love. Weil calls this process of escaping all ego narratives decreation. And it is a strange word she invented to describe something that is not quite destruction, but also not creation. It is undoing. It is going back. It is allowing artificial constructs of the ego to dissolve so that something more real can emerge. Decreation is not about becoming nothing. It is not about disappearing or losing identity. It is about distinguishing between who you really are and who ego says you are. And then gently, repeatedly, letting go of the stories ego tells you. Letting go of the need to make everything mean something about you. Letting go of the illusion that if you just understood what you did wrong, you could fix it and ensure that you would never be hurt that way again. The truth is that you can't guarantee that. You can't completely protect yourself from loss without also protecting yourself from love. You can't control whether people stay or go. You can't make yourself unbreakable without also making yourself incapable of feeling anything deeply. And Weil is saying that the only way out of this dilemma is to stop trying to control, stop trying to protect, stop trying to guarantee through perfect performance that you will never again be abandoned, and instead learn to exist more vulnerable, more open, knowing that you can be hurt from new, but choosing to live fully anyway. It sounds like insanity, I know. It sounds like advice to keep putting your hand in the fire after you've been burned, but what Weil realized is that the alternative is worse. The alternative is to close yourself off, protect yourself, live half a life where you never allow yourself to feel deeply, because feeling deeply means being able to be hurt deeply. And maybe that's what you're trying to do now without realizing it. Maybe you're building walls, telling yourself that you'll never let someone in so deeply again, that you'll never be so vulnerable again, that you've learned a lesson and now you'll be more careful, more protected, more in control. But Weil would say that those walls don't protect you, they just imprison you. They turn you into a smaller, more scared version of who you were, and the person who's gone doesn't deserve to be held responsible for turning you into someone you're afraid to love. She deserves something different. She deserves that you continue to be able to love deeply, that you honor what you had by remaining open to the possibility of future love, not because you are trying to replace her, but because you understand that the ability to love deeply is a gift, not a curse, even if sometimes it hurts unbearably. And here is something that Weil experienced in her own flesh that can illuminate her darkness. She never had a romantic relationship her entire life. She lived and died single, but she loved deeply. She loved her students. She loved the workers in the factories where she worked. She loved the poor and the suffering she encountered. She loved God in a way that consumed her entire life, and what she learned through this unreciprocated love, through this love that never found a suitable object in human form, is that love does not need reciprocity to be real. It does not need physical presence to be valid. It does not need the future to have value in the present. You can love someone who is absent with the same intensity, perhaps even more intensity, than you love someone who is present, because in absence you are forced to love the person themselves, not the benefits they bring to your life, not the way they make you feel, just them, as they are, as they were, as they remain in your memory and in your heart. And this love purified by absence, this love that survives the loss of the loved object, is what Weil calls supernatural love, not because it is magical or impossible, but because it transcends the natural limits of the ego that always wants something in return, that always loves because it loves receiving love in return, that always needs presence and reciprocity and confirmation. You are being forced now, through this brutal loss, to learn this kind of love, and there is no gentle way to learn it. There is no course you can take or book you can read that will spare you the pain of actually going through this process, because it is not information you need, it is transformation, and transformation always hurts. It always involves the death of something old so that something new can be born. What is dying in you now is not your capacity to love. It is your illusion that love means possession, your belief that loving someone means having them there, your attachment to the idea that you need the person you love to need you too. And now, before we descend even deeper into that abyss where deeper truths wait to be discovered, I want you to do something. I want you to leave in the comments below your city, your country, where you are watching this video from right now, because there is something profoundly beautiful and necessary in knowing that right now, all around the planet, there are other souls like yours carrying similar losses, feeling absences that no one else can see, loving people who are no longer here in the way they used to be, and maybe Simone Weil, where whatever she is now, she would be smiling to see that her words continue to reach those who need to hear them most, those who have the courage to look directly at the pain instead of looking away. So tell me, from where you watch us, leave your mark here, because you are not alone on this journey, and knowing that others walk this same path can make the difference between sinking and sailing, between being consumed by pain and learning to live with it with dignity. And now let's explore the deeper layer of that wound, because so far we've talked about loss and love and ego, but we haven't yet touched on what Weil considered the heart of the matter, which is the nature of the void itself, the space that the person left when they left, and what that empty space can become if you stop trying to fill it. You feel this emptiness like a hole, like an absence, like a lack of something that should be there but isn't. And your first instinct is to fill that hole with anything, with work, with new people, with distractions, with anything that makes you forget for a few moments that there is a space inside you where it used to be, and now it no longer is. But Weil would say that this instinct to fill the void is a fundamental error, not because you should like the void or celebrate it, but because as long as you are desperately trying to fill it, you will never discover why that void exists, what its function is, why it is there. Because for Weil, emptiness is not a defect, it is a characteristic, it is not a problem, it is a possibility. It is not what separates you from the divine, it is exactly what connects you to it. She wrote that God cannot fill what is already full, that he can only enter where there is empty space to receive him. And as long as you are filling your life with substitutes, with temporary consolations, with anything that dulls the pain of absence, you will never create enough space for something truly transformative to happen. And here's where her thinking becomes almost impossible to accept, because she's saying that you need to inhabit the void, sit in it, allow it to be exactly what it is without trying to change it or fix it or fill it. And that goes against every survival instinct you have. There is, against all cultural programming that says that emptiness is the enemy, that loneliness is a failure, that absence is something to be corrected as quickly as possible. But Weil insists, and his own life testifies to this, that deep in the void there is something waiting, not fulfillment, but presence of a different kind, not answer but deeper question, not solution but mystery that can be inhabited even without being resolved. She had 3 mystical experiences in her life that she described in letters. 3 moments where, in the midst of unbearable pain, something impossible happened, something that she could only describe as Christ taking possession of her, but not Christ of doctrine or of church or of theology, Christ as a living presence who entered the space created by her decreation. by her total consent to reality, including all its pain. The first time was in Assisi, 1937, in the small chapel of Santa Maria dos Anjos, where St. Francis had prayed, and she wrote that something stronger than her forced her to kneel for the first time in her life. She who had resisted any kind of religious submission, she who had kept an intellectual distance from any practice of faith, suddenly found herself on her knees, not because she decided to, but because something in that space, something in the combination of history and beauty and her own vulnerability in that moment, broke all her defenses. The second was in Solms during Holy Week, 1938, when her headaches were at their worst, when every note of the Gregorian chants pierced her skull like a needle, and it was exactly there, at the intersection of beauty and agony, that she first felt what she described as the love of Christ descending and taking hold of her. And the third was as she recited an English poem called Love by George Herbert, a poem about the soul that feels unworthy to enter the presence of God. And as she recited these words over and over, something changed. The recitation turned into prayer, and the prayer turned into presence. And she wrote that Christ came down and took her. What these three experiences have in common, what connects Assisi and Solesmes and Herbert's poem, is that in each case, Weil was not seeking anything. He was not trying to force spiritual experience. He was simply present to the beauty or the pain or the words. He was giving full attention without expectation of receiving anything in return. And it was precisely in this state of pure attention, in this state of temporarily suspended ego, that something greater could enter. And that's what she wants you to understand about the void that person left behind when they left, that as long as you're fighting the void, trying to run away from it or fill it or deny it, you're essentially saying no to the one thing that could turn your pain into something sacred. You are refusing the invitation implicit in suffering, the invitation to decreate, to let go, to allow the ego that needs it so much and suffers so much because it needs it to dissolve enough so that something other than ego can emerge. This is not masochism. It is not romanticizing suffering. It is not seeking pain for the sake of pain. Weil was very clear about this. She distinguished between suffering that can and should be avoided and affliction that must be overcome because it contains a lesson that can only be learned in this way. You didn't choose this pain, it chose you. The person left this void, and now you have a simple but brutal choice. You can spend the rest of your life running away from this void, building walls around it, trying to pretend it doesn't exist, or you can turn around and face it. You can step into the middle of it. You can allow it to be exactly as big and as dark as it really is, and see what happens when you stop fighting. Weil would call this consent to emptiness, and consent for her is not passive resignation. It is not simply accepting because there is no choice. It is something much more active. It is choosing to embrace reality completely, including your pain. It is saying yes to the universe exactly as it is in this moment, even when it is causing you unbearable agony. And she knew that this sounds crazy. She herself admitted that it seems impossible. But she also experienced what happens on the other side of this impossibility. She discovered that when you consent completely, when you stop fighting and surrender completely, not to the pain, but to the reality that includes the pain, something changes. Not that the pain disappears, but that your relationship with pain transforms. You stop being a victim of the pain and become a witness to it. You stop identifying completely with what you are suffering, and you manage to create a little space between yourself and suffering. Space where observation happens, space where choice still exists, even when it feels like everything has been taken away from you. And in that space, in that little space between you and your pain, between the observer and the observed, between the sufferer and the suffering itself, is where grace can enter. Not grace that you earn or else. It erects or earns through effort, but grace that descends when you finally create enough empty space to receive it. Will wrote that grace fills emptiness, but can only enter where there is emptiness to receive it, and as long as you are full of narratives about your pain, full of resistance and anger and unanswered whys, full of all the defense mechanisms the ego has built to protect you from feeling the full extent of the loss, there is no room for anything new to enter. You need to empty. You need to let go. You need to allow everything you thought you knew about who you are and what you need and what life should be like to dissolve. And only then, Only in that state of total emptiness can something impossible happen. This is not a promise. It is not a guarantee. Weil was very clear that grace cannot be forced or sought directly. You cannot do the right things and expect grace to appear as a reward, because the moment you are doing something to obtain grace, you have already brought ego back. You have already turned spiritual practice into ego project. You have already lost exactly what you were trying to find. What you can do is create conditions. You can practice mindfulness. You can practice consent. You can practice decreation, and then wait. Wait without waiting for something specific. Wait without a schedule. Wait in the way that earth waits for rain, not actively seeking, but remaining open to possibility, remaining receptive to whatever may come. And while you wait, while you inhabit this void that person left, something strange begins to happen. You begin to realize that the void itself is alive in a way. It is not dead or inert. It is pulsing with possibility. It is pregnant with something that has not yet been born but is already growing. And you don't know what it is. You can't name it or describe it, but you feel its presence in the same way you feel the presence of someone in a dark room even without seeing them. And maybe, just maybe, what you are feeling in that void is presence of the person who is gone, but in a completely different way than when they were here. Not physical presence that you can touch or see or hear, but presence that exists on a deeper level. Presence that does not depend on physical proximity or even physical life. Presence that is pure, formless essence. Love without the need for reciprocity. Connection that transcends separation. Weil would say that this is not fantasy or self-deception. It is not a way of denying the reality of loss. It is exactly the opposite. It is only when you completely accept physical loss that you can discover a different form of presence that was always there but was obscured by your need for physical presence. When someone is here, you love their physical presence so much that you can't see beyond it, can't realize that there is something deeper going on, something that doesn't depend on body or voice or touch. But when that physical presence is removed, when you are forced to continue loving in absence, then finally you can discover what it is that you are really loving. Not body or personality or characteristics that make this person unique, but something more essential, something Weil would call the divine part in every human being, the spark of infinity that exists in everyone but is often hidden behind all the layers of ego and personality and worldly identifications. And when you love that part, when your love reaches that depth, then physical separation loses some of its terror, not because it no longer hurts, but because you know that what you truly love can never be taken from you, can never die, can never go away, because it exists in a dimension that is not subject to time or space or any of the limitations that govern physical existence. This sounds too mystical, I know. It sounds like spiritual escapism, like a way of not dealing with the harsh reality of loss. But Weil would insist that it is exactly the opposite, that only when you completely accept the physical reality of loss, only when you stop clinging to fantasies about the person coming back or somehow still being here the way they were, only then can you discover a form of presence that is more real than physical presence ever was, because it is not dependent on external conditions, cannot be taken away by death or distance or change of feelings. And here's where we need to be brutally honest, because Weil has always been brutally honest. And if you want to really understand what she's offering, you need to face the whole truth without sugarcoating. This form of presence that I'm describing, this connection that transcends physical separation, it doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't make you miss the person any less. It doesn't make it easier to wake up every day in a world where they're no longer present in the way you need them to be. What it does, if it does anything, is change the quality of the pain, transforming the pain of an open wound that is constantly bleeding into the pain of a scar that still hurts when touched but is no longer painful. Slowly. The wound doesn't close completely, Weil never promised it would, but it stops being everything you are, stops completely defining your existence. You learn to carry pain without being crushed by it. You learn to function even while part of you is still bleeding. You learn that it is possible to feel deep pain and still find moments of beauty, moments of joy, moments of connection with others, moments where life is still worth living, even with this enormous weight you carry. And this ability to live with unbearable pain, to continue living fully, even while carrying a wound that never completely heals, this is what Weil considered true spiritual strength, not the ability to avoid suffering or overcome it quickly, but the ability to remain present to suffering without being destroyed by it, to keep some part of you intact, some part that you can still observe, can still choose, can still love, even when everything else is in pieces. Because here is the truth that no one wants to hear but that needs to be said. Some wounds never completely heal, some loves are never completely left behind, some losses mark you permanently, and you never return to the person you were before the loss happened. And modern society hates this truth. It wants you to recover, it wants you to move on, it wants you to be functional and productive and happy again within a reasonable time frame. But Weil is saying that maybe you shouldn't recover completely, maybe the permanent mark that this loss left on you is something valuable, something that connects you to the deeper truth about the nature of human existence, something that makes you able to understand the suffering of others in ways that people who have never been deeply hurt can never understand. You have been initiated into mystery through pain. You have crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. You have seen something about the nature of reality that cannot be unseen. And this brutal initiation, this permanent wound, it gives you something. It does not compensate for loss. Nothing could compensate, but it gives you depth. It gives you the ability to be present to the pain of others without trying to fix it. It gives you wisdom that only comes from having survived the unbearable. It gives you compassion, which is different from pity because it comes from recognition of suffering, shared not from a position of superiority. And maybe that's what the person who passed away gave you, without knowing, without choosing, without wanting to. She gave you this wound that opened you in ways that nothing else could have opened. She forced you to confront truths about love and loss and impermanence that you could have avoided for a lifetime if she hadn't left. She pushed you to depths that you would never have chosen to reach, but that now that she's there, reveals things that people who stay on the surface will never see. Weil wrote that only in extreme pain do we see extreme truth, that comfort and ease keep you blind to certain fundamental realities, that only when you are stripped of everything you thought you needed do you discover what you really need, what really matters, what really remains when everything else is removed. And what remains, what survives the loss of everything, including the loss of the person you loved most, is something Weil would call your deepest essence, the part of you that exists independent of any relationship or identity or achievement, the part that simply is, that needs no reason or justification to exist, that remains intact no matter what happens in the external world. And discovering that part, having direct access to it, only happens when all the superficial layers are removed, when you are stripped of everything you thought defined you, when you are forced to exist without external supports, without validations from others, without comforts that usually distract you from confronting who you truly are at your core. The person who left took with them all the ways you had to avoid this confrontation. They took the comfort of being loved. They took the validation of being chosen. They took the distraction of the relationship. And now you are alone in a way that perhaps you have never been before. Not just physically alone, but existentially alone, face to face with your own existence, with nothing between you and the abyss. And that is terrifying, but it is also liberating in a strange way, because when there is nothing to hold on to, you find that you don't need to hold on to anything. When there is no one to save you, you find that you don't need to. To be saved, when there is no external validation, you discover that value does not come from outside, but from something deeper that has never depended on opinions or approval or love from others. This doesn't make loss any less painful. It doesn't make you miss the person less. But it changes something fundamental about how you exist in the world. You stop being dependent on external confirmation that you are worth existing, and you start existing for their own sake, right? Not because someone loves you or chooses you or validates you, but simply because existence in itself, your mere presence in the universe, is enough. And now we are at the deepest place of this descent, at the point where words begin to fail, because we are talking about experiences that are beyond language, experiences that Weil had, but that she herself admitted she could not adequately express, moments of grace that she described as Christ descending, but that you can experience like anything else, depending on your spiritual language or lack thereof, moments where deep in the most complete void, something impossible happens, not because you did something right, or because you deserve it, or because you finally understand, but simply because grace is like that. It comes as it comes. It fills the empty space you created through of decreation, enters where there is sufficient opening to receive it. And if this happens to you, if in the midst of this impossible pain that you are feeling now something begins to change, if you suddenly feel presence where before there was only absence, if you have a moment of clarity where you understand something that cannot be put into words, but that changes everything fundamentally, do not be surprised. Do not reject it as illusion or self-deception. Simply receive, simply allow, simply consent to this grace in the same way you consented to the pain that preceded it. But don't wait for it either. Don't make it an objective. Don't turn the search for grace into a new ego project. Because the moment you do that, you've already lost. You've already brought the ego back. You've already transformed decreation into creation. Just keep living, keep feeling, keep loving the person who is gone even in their absence. Keep inhabiting the void without trying to fill it, and let grace be their problem, not yours. Let the universe decide when and how and if something will change, and in the meantime, simply be present. Simply pay attention to what is. Simply exist in the most complete way possible, even in the midst of pain. Because here is the last truth that Weil has to offer. A truth that sums up everything she has learned through a lifetime of suffering and contemplation. The pain you feel now, this specific pain of this specific loss, she has come to teach you something you could learn no other way. She has come to show you something about love that can only be seen when love is tested by absence. She has come to reveal to you something about who you really are that can only be revealed when everything you thought you were is removed. And the lesson is not that you must stop loving to avoid future pain. It is not that you must protect yourself or close yourself off or live more cautiously. The lesson is exactly the opposite. It is that true love, love of the kind that Weil describes as impersonal or supernatural, that love cannot exist without risk of loss, cannot exist without total vulnerability, cannot exist without the possibility of extreme pain. Because love that protects itself from pain is not real love. It is just ego trying to ensure its own comfort. So the person who left, through his departure, through the brutal pain that his absence causes, is teaching you to truly love, is forcing you to purify your love of all elements of need and possession and expectation, is initiating you into the mystery of love that does not need a present object to be real, love that exists for its own sake, love that is a state of being, not a transaction between two people, love that comes closest to what Weil would call divine love, because it seeks nothing in return, does not expect reciprocity, does not depend on favorable conditions. He simply loves because he cannot not love. And you didn't want to learn that lesson? No one does. No one would choose this path if there was another. But now that you're on it, now that there's no going back, now that person has gone and left you with this open wound and this impossible absence, you have a choice about what to do with it. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it transform you. You can close yourself off, or you can open yourself up even more. You can use pain as an excuse to stop living fully, or you can use pain as a portal to live more fully than you've ever lived before. And this choice is not unique. It is not something you make once, and that's it. It is a choice that you have to make again, every day, every hour, every time the pain returns and tempts you to give up. Every time the absence weighs so much that you are not sure if you can continue. Every time you ask yourself if it is worth continuing to feel when feeling hurts so much. The answer that Weil lived and died defending is yes, always yes. It's worth continuing to feel. It's worth continuing to love. It's worth remaining present to pain because the alternative is death in life. It's existing without actually living. It's protecting yourself so completely that you stop being capable of anything that really matters. And then you wake up each morning and choose again. Choose to continue, choose to feel, choose to love, choose to escape. Look at being present even when presence hurts. And some days this choice is easy, and other days it is impossible, and you fail, and you close yourself off and run away, and everything is okay. Because Weil herself did not live perfectly what she taught. She herself had moments of despair and escape and refusal. She was human, not a saint. She was a deeply wounded person trying to understand her own wounds, not an enlightened master who transcended all suffering. And perhaps that's what makes her teaching more valuable. It doesn't come from a place of having overcome, but from a place of being in the middle. It doesn't come from a position of strength, but from a recognition of shared weakness. It doesn't come from distant wisdom, but from present struggle. And you can trust her exactly because she's not offering you an easy solution or a false promise or a path that avoids pain. She's just saying, look directly at this, feel it completely, consent completely, and see what happens when you stop fighting. And what happens if you really do that? If you really go down into the depths of pain and dwell in the void and practice mindfulness and decreation and consent, what happens is not that pain disappears, but that you discover an ability to carry pain that you didn't know you had. You discover a reservoir of strength that comes not from you, but from something greater than you. You discover that you can endure the unbearable, not because you are strong, but because there is something holding you up, that you cannot see but can feel, something that Weil would call grace, but that you can call it what you want. Invisible presence that keeps you standing when all logic says you should fall. And over time, not quickly but gradually, so gradually that you barely notice it happening, your relationship with pain changes. You stop being consumed by it and start being able to observe it. Stop identifying completely with the person who is suffering and start recognizing that there is something in you that is beyond suffering, that can witness suffering without being destroyed by it, that can feel deep pain and still find moments of peace, moments of beauty, moments where life still makes sense even in the midst of loss. And a person who is gone, they remain absent. That never changes. You never stop missing them. You never stop wishing they were here. It never stops hurting when you see something they would love or think of something you would like to share with them but can't. But somehow you learn to live with it. You learn to carry absence as a permanent part of who you are now. You learn that it is possible to be a person who has lost someone important and still be a whole person, still be a person capable of joy and love and hope, still be a person who is worth it. And maybe, just maybe, the person who passed away would be proud to see you learn this, would be happy to know that the love you shared was strong enough to transform you, even in her absence, would be at peace knowing that she didn't destroy you by leaving, but somehow, through the brutal pain of her departure, helped you discover who you really are when everything else is removed. Because true love is not about holding someone close to you. It is about freeing both of you to be completely who you are, even if it means separation, even if it means pain, even if it means carrying absence for the rest of your life. And if you can love like that, if you can honor someone who has passed by continuing to love them in the pure form that only exists in absence, then you will have learned something that most people never learn, something that Simone Weil spent her entire life trying to teach. But that can only be truly understood by those who, like you, have been forced to descend into the abyss and discover what waits at the bottom. But this discovery that Weil made, this possibility of transforming pain into something sacred through attention and decreation and consent, it is not cheap consolation. It is not New Age optimism that promises that everything will be okay if you just change your perspective. It is something much more radical and much truer, because what she saw at the bottom of that pain reveals something about the nature of human existence that changes everything, something about what really matters when everything else is removed, something about who you really are when you can no longer hide behind identities and roles and relationships that define you. And that is what we are going to explore now, not as an abstract theory, but as a lived experience, not as a philosophical concept, but as a truth that you can verify in your own flesh. Because the pain you are feeling right now is not just about losing a specific person. It is a portal to deeper understanding of all human existence. And if you have the courage to look directly at what that pain is revealing, you will discover things that people who have never been deeply hurt will never have access to. The first truth that pain reveals, the first lesson that comes when you completely stop running from it, the wound is that you never really owned the person who passed away. They were never yours, in the sense that the ego likes to think things are yours. They were always an autonomous being with their own existence and their own choices and their own path that eventually led them away from you. And while she was there, you could maintain the illusion of possession. You could think in terms of my love, my person, my relationship. You could build identity around being part of us instead of just me. But now that she is gone, now that there are no more knots to hold on to, you are forced to confront the brutal truth that Weil was trying to teach. That love that depends on possession is not real love. It is just a sophisticated form of selfishness. It is wanting someone not because you love them, but because their presence makes you feel complete, makes you feel less alone, it makes you feel like you have finally found something that fills the inner void that has always been there. And when a person leaves, when you can no longer possess them even in your imagination, you find out if there was real love there or just a disguised need for love. You find out if you can continue loving when there is nothing left to gain from that love, when there is no reciprocity to hope for, when there is no presence to enjoy, only absence to endure. And if you manage to continue loving under these conditions, if you discover that love did not die when the person left but only changed form, then you have learned something fundamental about the nature of love that most never learn. You have learned that true love is not about having, but about being. It is not about receiving, but about giving without expectation of return. It is not about filling emptiness, but about remaining present to the emptiness with an open heart. Weil would call this impersonal love, and the word impersonal is scary because it seems to suggest coldness or distance or a lack of genuine connection. But she meant exactly the opposite. She meant love that is not filtered through ego needs. Love that sees a person as they really are, not as a projection of your own needs. Love that wants good from the person, not because that good benefits you, but simply because you want them to be happy, even if their happiness means your own pain. And that sounds impossible. It sounds like asking someone to go against all human nature. But Weil insists that it is not impossible because she lived it. She loved this way. She practiced pure attention to people without wanting anything in return. She gave herself completely to causes that brought her no personal benefit. She chose to suffer with those who suffered, not because she had to, but because impersonal love compelled her not to separate herself from the suffering of others. And perhaps you are discovering now, through your own pain, that you have the capacity for this kind of love, that you can continue to love the person who has passed away even if their departure caused you agony, that you can honor their memory not through bitterness or resentment, but through gratitude for the time you had together, that you can recognize that they had the right to make their own choices, even if those choices meant your loss. This doesn't make pain less, it doesn't make you miss it less, but it changes something fundamental about how you carry pain, transforms it from something that poisons you into something that purifies you, transforms it from a wound that festers into a wound that cleanses, transforms it from a weight that crushes you into a weight that strengthens you in strange and paradoxical ways. And the second truth that pain reveals is that the loneliness you feel now, this brutal loneliness of being without a person who made you feel less alone, is not new. You have always been alone in that fundamental sense that Weil describes. You just didn't realize it, because the person's presence distracted you from confronting the essential loneliness of human existence. Each human being is fundamentally alone, inhabits his or her own consciousness that no one else can directly access, experiences life from within, from a unique perspective that no other can fully share, carries within him or her a space of solitude that no companionship can fully fill. And most people spend their entire lives running away from this truth, building relationships and communities and identities that make them forget that deep down they are alone. But Weil says this running away is a mistake, not because loneliness is good, but because trying to run away from it keeps you from discovering what loneliness really is, what it contains, what can be found deep within it when you stop fighting it and simply inhabit the space of being completely alone with yourself. And what Weil discovered when she inhabited her own solitude, when she allowed herself to feel the full extent of being alone without trying to fill space with distractions or relationships or activities, is that at the bottom of the deepest solitude, there is something waiting, not another person, and not fulfillment and not solution to loneliness, but presence of a different kind, presence that she called God, but that you can excite. Experience as deep peace or a sense of belonging to the universe or recognition that being alone does not mean being abandoned. Because there is a difference between loneliness that comes from feeling separated from everything and loneliness that comes from recognizing that you are part of everything, between loneliness of ego that feels isolated and alone and loneliness of essence that recognizes that individuality and connection are not opposites but two sides of the same reality. And the person who passed away, through his departure, gave you the opportunity to discover this difference, forced you to confront the loneliness that you always carried, but that was hidden behind the illusion of not being alone. And now you have a choice. You can use this loneliness as an excuse to close yourself off and never trust again, or you can use it as a portal to discover a different type of connection that does not depend on anyone's physical presence. And the third truth that pain reveals, perhaps the most radical of all, is that you don't need the person who left to be complete. You never did. You just thought you needed it because ego builds a narrative of incompleteness that can only be resolved by something external. But the truth that Weil was trying to teach is that completeness doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from finding the right person or the right achievement or the right experience. It comes from recognizing that you are already complete in essence, that the search for external fulfillment is based on a fundamental misunderstanding about your own nature. It doesn't mean that the person who passed away didn't matter. It doesn't mean that the love you shared wasn't real or valuable. It just means that their value wasn't in filling something that was missing in you, but in sharing existence with you, in creating something beautiful together that wouldn't exist without both of them, in helping you see aspects of yourself that you couldn't see alone. But when she left, when that mirror was removed, when you were left alone to confront your own existence without a reflection of her, you discovered something terrifying, but also liberating. You discovered that you can exist without her, that you can breathe and function, and even find moments of joy even in her absence. And it makes you feel guilty, because it feels like betrayal to continue living when she is no longer here. But Weil would say that continuing to live is not betrayal. It is honor. It is a deeper form of love because it shows that what she gave you was not a crutch. You needed to walk, but strength, that it is now a permanent part of who you are. And perhaps the greatest truth that pain reveals, the truth that can only be seen when you descend to the absolute bottom of the abyss and look directly at what is there, is that pain itself is not the enemy. It is not something that needs to be eliminated or avoided at all costs. It is an essential part of being alive. It is proof that you loved deeply enough to care deeply. It is a mark of having lived fully, not of having lived badly. Weil wrote that grief is a horrible privilege. A privilege because only through it certain truths reveal themselves. Horrible because it hurts so that nothing else hurts. And you are now the bearer of that horrible privilege. You have been initiated into mystery through pain. You know something about life and death and love and loss that cannot be taught, only explained, can only be known through direct experience of having lost someone who mattered more than any explanation can capture. And this brutal knowledge marks you permanently, separates you from people who have never been so deeply hurt, puts you in silent communion with all others who bear similar losses, makes you capable of compassion that comes not from pity, but from recognition of shared suffering. And maybe that's what the person who passed away gave you through his departure, not intentionally, not because he chose, but through an accident of circumstance or the need to follow his own path, or simply because nothing lasts forever, and everything that is loved is eventually lost in one way or another. He gave you depth. He gave you wisdom that comes from having survived the unbearable. He gave you the ability to see beauty in the midst of pain, because now you know that both can coexist. That life is not either happiness or suffering, but both intertwined in impossible ways. To separate. And how you live with all of this, how you integrate these brutal truths into everyday life without being consumed by them, how you continue to function in a world that expects you to be normal when you carry weight that no one else can see. Simone Weil not only philosophized about this, she developed concrete practices that are born not from theory, but from the need to find ways to survive one's pain without losing sanity or dignity. And it is these practices that can make the difference. Between sinking and sailing, between being destroyed by pain and being transformed by it. The first practice that Weil developed and lived is what she called pure attention. And attention, in the sense she uses, it is not simply paying attention, is something much more radical. It is looking at something without desire to change it, without judgment about whether it is good or bad, without trying to use what you are observing for your own purposes. It is simply seeing, simply being present, simply allowing reality to be what it is while you observe. And you can practice this with your own pain. You can wake up every morning and dedicate the first few minutes of the day just observing what hurts, not trying to fix it, not trying to understand why it hurts, not trying to make the pain go away, just recognizing that it is there, internally naming it without judgment. Today, the lack is present. Today, the loneliness is heavy. Today, the longing is impossible. Just simple recognition of what is. And what Weil discovered through this practice is that when you stop fighting pain, when you simply allow it to be what it is, something changes in the quality of the pain. It doesn't disappear, but you stop being completely identified with it. You create little space between yourself and suffering where observation happens. And in that space, there is strange freedom. Freedom from not being totally defined by what you are feeling. Freedom from recognizing that you are greater than your pain even. When pain seems all-consuming. The second practice is to deliberately seek beauty even in the midst of the most intense pain, not as a distraction and not as a way of denying pain, but as a recognition that reality contains both simultaneously, that even on its worst days, there is still heaven, and there is still music, and there are still moments of grace if you pay attention to them. Weil considered beauty as a form of experimental proof that transcendence is possible, that there is something beyond material suffering, even when you are completely immersed in material suffering. And when pain is unbearable, when you are not sure you can go on another day, find something beautiful, anything, sunset or poem or song or stranger's face on the street, and give it your full attention for 5 minutes. Not to forget pain, but to remember that pain is not all there is, that the world still contains beauty even when you are bleeding. The third practice is continuous decreation, which means noticing when you are constructing narratives about your pain, when you are creating stories about what loss means about you, or about the future, or about the possibility of happiness, and gently releasing those stories over and over again, each time you notice ego trying to transform the raw experience of pain into drama about the meaning of everything. Your mind will tell stories, it won't stop. Ego needs narratives to make sense of experience. But you can learn to recognize when it's happening and choose not to believe the stories completely. You can internally say, this is story, not reality. This is interpretation, not fact, and return to the raw feeling of pain without all the layers of meaning that ego adds. And Weil discovered that when you practice this consistently, when you keep releasing ego narratives over and over again, something happens. Ego starts to loosen, it starts to decree, and you start to experience reality more directly, less filtered through ego needs and fears and desires. The fourth practice is to continue doing what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like it. Even when the pain is so bad that getting out of bed seems impossible. You get up anyway, you work, you create, you take care of responsibilities, but without demanding that these activities make you feel better, without using productivity as a way to prove your worth or escape pain, just doing it because it's what there is to do. Well called this egoless action, doing without seeking emotional reward, and she found that when you act this way, when you remove expectations that activity is supposed to fill emptiness or make pain go away, you are able to function even in the midst of the most intense suffering, because you are not adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from demanding that things be different than they are. The fifth practice is daily consent, which means when you wake up each morning, before you know what the day will be like, before you feel whether the pain is better or worse, you choose to accept what comes. You internally say, I accept whatever this day brings, not as resignation, but as an act of love for reality, as a choice not to fight what is, but to work with what is. And then when the day brings pain, when you have a difficult moment or painful memory or impossible longing, you remember that you consented, that you chose to accept what came, and that changes something about how you experience difficulty, because it is no longer an unwanted surprise, but an expected part of the reality you have already agreed to embrace. The sixth practice that Weil lived intensely is to be present to others even when you are in pain, to give someone your full attention in conversation, not because you have forgotten your own laugh at pain, but because you choose to temporarily place your attention elsewhere, because you recognize that pain is not the only reality, that other people also exist and also suffer and also need presence. And Weil discovered that attention to others is the purest form of love and also momentarily frees. You from the prison of self-concern, not because you are denying pain, but because you are choosing that pain will not prevent you from being present to the life that continues to happen around you. The seventh practice is to write to your pain as if it were a person. Once a week, sit down with paper and begin "Dear Loneliness," or "Dear Loss," or "Dear Longing," and write honestly about what you are feeling. Be grateful for what pain taught you, even if you hated learning. Recognize the weight you carry. Ask for strength to continue. Not as a therapeutic exercise, but as a way of honoring pain instead of just trying to eliminate it, as recognition that pain is part of you now and deserves to be seen. And heard even when it is difficult to bear. And the eighth practice is a nightly ritual of recognition, before bed, naming 3 things: a truth that pain revealed today that you didn't want to see, a moment of grace, no matter how small, maybe just a deep breath or a ray of sunshine or the kindness of a stranger, and a choice you made to stay, to continue, to not give up even when part of you wanted to. Not as a way of forcing gratitude, but as a way of recognizing that even on terrible days, there is still something beyond terrible there. Is still you choosing to continue. There is still life happening, even in the midst of loss. And these practices are not magical cures. We'll never promise they would be. Some days you will be able to practice them, and other days it will be completely impossible. And that is okay. Failure to practice is not failure. It is part of the process. It is recognition that you are human, not machine, that you have limits, and some days the pain will be beyond any ability to work with it. And on those days, all you can do is survive. And that is enough. Surviving is enough. Continuing to breathe is. Enough, not giving up, is enough even when you cannot do anything beyond that. And while herself couldn't live perfectly what she taught, she had moments of deep despair, moments where the pain was too much, moments where she wished she didn't exist. She was human, deeply wounded, struggling with a body that wouldn't cooperate, and a mind that suffered, and a world that seemed determined to continue causing suffering to everyone she loved. And in the end, she died young. Died in a way that some considered passive suicide because she refused to eat properly while suffering. From tuberculosis, and perhaps she failed in her own practices in the end, or perhaps she simply reached the limit of what the human body could withstand. and made a choice that made sense to her at that moment. No one can judge, but the fact that she didn't perfectly live what she taught doesn't make teachings less valuable. It makes them more valuable because they come from a place of real struggle, not from distant wisdom. They come from someone who was in the middle of the battle, not from someone who had already won. And maybe that's why you can trust what she says, because she's not offering solutions from someone who has never suffered. She's offering companionship from someone who has suffered deeply and yet found ways to live with dignity even in the midst of impossible pain. And now, having walked this journey together through pain, through the truth revealed in the darkness, through the practices of living with a wound that never completely closes, there is only one thing left: to honor what you had the courage to face during these minutes we spent together, to recognize that simply having stayed here, having looked directly at what hurts instead of looking away, is an act of courage that most people never have. You have come this far, and that already says something about you. That you are among the few who have the ability to look at the truth even when the truth hurts. That you are not satisfied with superficial consolations or empty promises that everything will be fine quickly. That you want to understand deeply, even if deep understanding means feeling deeply. And Simone Weil would be recognizing you now as a courageous soul, as someone who does not run away from affliction but faces it directly. As someone who is learning through pain what cannot be learned in any other way. And if you felt during these minutes that something changed inside you, if some truth here resonated with a deep part of your soul that you barely knew existed, if you recognized your own pain in the words about lost love and absence that remains, and wound that never completely heals, then leave a like on this video, because it shows me that these words are reaching those who really need them, those who have the courage to look at what that hurts instead of continuing to run away. And subscribe. To the channel so we can continue this journey of looking directly at the truth even when it hurts. Because there are others who are walking this same path, others who have loved and lost and continue to carry love in absence, and you don't have to walk this darkness alone. The pain you feel for your departed lover is not a defect in your soul. It is not evidence of weakness. It is not something that needs to be fixed within a timetable that society deems acceptable. It is a mark of having loved deeply, of having been vulnerable enough to allow someone to matter so much that losing them temporarily destroys you. And Simone Weil discovered that deep within this destruction, when you stop fighting and allow the old self to dissolve, something impossible can happen. You don't stop feeling pain, but you stop being just a person in pain. You become something more, someone who knows depth, someone who has been marked by true love, someone who has learned the brutal truth that love that really matters is love that continues to exist, even when the object of love is no longer present, love that doesn't need. Reciprocity or presence or future, love that simply is because it can't not be. The person who is gone has not disappeared completely. They continue to live in places no one sees, in the way you look at the world now, in truths you know that you didn't know before, in an increased capacity for compassion for others who suffer, in a permanent wound that connects you to all others who bear similar losses, in love that you still feel no longer has a physical object, but that is real nonetheless, perhaps more real now than when it was present. Because now you love without the possibility of reward. You love simply because love is what remains when everything else is removed. And you will never wake up one day and find that pain is completely gone. You will never completely stop missing it. You will never stop wishing things were different. But what you can discover, what Weil promised is possible if you have the courage to go deep enough, is that you can learn to live fully even while carrying pain. You can find moments of real joy even in the midst of lingering sadness. You can love again without betraying the memory of those who are gone because you understand. Now that the human heart has no limit to its capacity, that loving someone new does not diminish love. For those who have passed, that you can honor the past while remaining open to the future. And the choice is yours now. No one can take this journey for you. No one can decree your ego for you. No one can consent to reality for you. You have to choose each day whether you will look directly at the pain or look away, whether you will dwell in emptiness or desperately try to fill it, whether you will allow lost love to transform you or destroy you. Simone Weil does not promise that it will be easy. She has lived it and knows that it is not. She only promises that it is possible, that there is a way through the impossible, that you can survive the unbearable and emerge on the other side not intact, but transformed, not healed, but able to carry the wound with dignity. And even if you choose to look the other way today, even if you are not yet ready to face the full extent of the pain, knowing that there is a way already changes something. Knowing that others have crossed this abyss and survived already offers something. Knowing that you are not completely alone, even in the deepest loneliness, is already a form of grace. And Simone Weil, who lived only 34 years, but in that short time looked more deeply into human pain than most dare in a lifetime. She found no cure, but she found dignity. She found no escape, but she found meaning. She found no way to avoid suffering, but she found a way to transform suffering into something that doesn't destroy you, but reveals you. And perhaps that is what we are all really looking for. Not the absence of pain, but the ability to bear pain with truth, with attention, with love. Not escape from life, but the ability to live fully, even though we know that life includes the inevitable loss of everything we love. You are not alone on this journey, and the pain you carry, however heavy it may be, is shaping you into something you cannot yet see but will one day recognize. It is teaching you truths about love that can only be learned through loss. It is initiating you into the mystery that only the wounded know. Keep looking, keep feeling, keep living, keep loving even when loving hurts impossible, because that's exactly what Simone Weil would do. That's exactly what she taught through every moment of her brief and intense and painful life, that to truly live means to be willing to feel completely, that to love truly means to be willing to lose completely, that to be human truly means to carry wounds that never closes with the dignity of someone who knows that a wound is a mark of having lived with. Enough courage to care deeply about something beyond oneself.